Can a nation become too wealthy for its own good? That's the uneasy question hanging over Manila this week. The Philippines has just been upgraded to upper middle income status, a moment hailed as a proud graduation. But travel a few hundred kilometers from the press conferences, and the celebration starts to feel very different. Act 1. The celebration in Manila, the caution in Masbate. Can a nation become too wealthy for its own good? That's the question hanging over Manila since the announcement that the Philippines has been upgraded to upper middle income status. The celebration in the capital tells one story. The caution on the ground tells another. The National Economic and Development Authority called it exactly that, a graduation, the reward for decades of hard-won progress. Yet in the same breath, Secretary Arsenio Balisacan delivered a sobering warning that most headlines missed. Reaching the threshold is one thing, surviving what comes next is something else entirely. To understand what he means, leave the air-conditioned boardrooms and head to the coastal municipality of Uson, Masbate. Behind the counter of a small sari-sari store, the owner isn't celebrating GNI figures. She's wondering whether her next delivery will arrive before the shelves run empty. It usually doesn't. Standard deliveries now take 3 weeks. 3 weeks. So she bulk buys to survive, draining her limited cash and leaving her with nothing if prices suddenly spike. This is the quiet reality. A country can graduate on paper while small businesses 3 weeks from collapse keep running on the same razor-thin margins as before. The calculation runs like this. Standard deliveries now arrive 3 weeks late, a recurring bottleneck that forces the owner into defensive bulk buying just to keep the shelves stocked. That bulk buying drains whatever liquid capital they have, leaving no buffer for a sudden price spike or a bad month. That crossing runs through a specific formula. The World Bank measures it through the Atlas method, averaging income per person over a 3-year window to smooth out currency swings. So how did the Philippines finally cross this line? In that measure, the upper middle income band runs from $4,636 to $14,375. The Philippines registered 4,850 just above the floor, closing out a 39-year run in the lower tier that started back in 1987. That crossing looks precarious up close. Growth in the first quarter of 2026 came in at just 2.8%, sharp enough that the government cut its full-year target from a 5 to 6% band down to 3.5 to 4.5. The driver fuel prices, pushed higher by the conflict in the Middle East, rippling through the same domestic supply chains that keep the Masbate shelves stocked. The politics have not helped either. On the 9th of February, the stock exchange dropped 0.6% to close at 6,349.16. The same day, an impeachment complaint landed in Congress. Chief economist Michael Ricafort warned the political friction risks distracting lawmakers from the fiscal reforms the country now needs to defend its new status. Act 2. 2 engines, 1 threshold. Here is what makes this moment worth watching regionally, not just nationally. Vietnam crossed the identical threshold the very same week by a completely different path. The structural divergence between the two models is the real story. Vietnam spent just 17 years in the lower middle tier, from 2009 to 2026 against the Philippines' 39. The engine behind that faster climb, aggressive export-oriented manufacturing in electronics, textiles, and global supply chains. The scale behind it is hard to overstate. Vietnam drew in $168 billion in foreign direct investment between 2010 and 2023, pushing its export to GDP ratio to around 106%. World Bank Country Director Mariam Sherman put it simply, pulling rural labor steadily into global electronics and textile supply chains produces a highly predictable compounding wealth effect. The Philippines took a different bet. Its export to GDP ratio sits at a much lower 27 to 32%, with business process outsourcing contributing 8.5% and the rest sustained by remittances from overseas workers. Indonesia, for comparison, already sits comfortably inside this tier at $5,120 per capita. The risk for the Philippines is exposure when global consumption shifts in a way its factory floor neighbors are not. That remittance flow works as a stabilizer, reaching households directly without routing through slow domestic administration. But it is also a mask. It subsidizes consumption without forcing the harder structural work of building higher productivity jobs at home, and the region's factory-based economies are not standing still while it does. Act 3. 2 scenarios. 1 narrow buffer. Because the Philippines crossed this threshold with minimal margin, its next decade splits into 2 entirely different paths. In the adverse version, the OECD's July 2026 survey names weak public investment, tied to corruption controls, as a leading downside risk. Political friction stalls infrastructure spending and fiscal reform. Regional logistics, ports, and roads stay unfunded, locking in exactly the 3-week delays already draining Masbate. That matters because upper middle income status starts a countdown. Concessional loans from international development banks, the ones with low interest rates and decades-long grace periods, begin a multi-year phase-out. If the classification reverses, the country risks losing that concessional access while still being priced by markets as a commercial borrower, paying market rates at exactly the moment it needs to fund the infrastructure that could break the logistics bottleneck. The other path uses the new status as a reputational lever instead. The government dismantles domestic monopolies, simplifies business registration, and invests in regional maritime infrastructure, ports, roads, supply chains. Sustaining the upgrade then means shifting from defensive consumption toward high-value digital services and modern logistics. Oh, the quiet redrawing of Southeast Asia. The Philippines and Vietnam are not upgrading in isolation. Their concurrent moves are part of a broader shift already underway across the region's development map. In the same World Bank review cycle, 5 nations across Southeast Asia moved up a tier and not one moved down. Poverty reduction is giving way to a more complex era of middle-income governance challenges. The region's economic center of gravity is shifting steadily toward the equator, which leaves a deeper question than whether the Philippines deserves its new headline status. Can an economy built on consumption, services, and remittances withstand the institutional pressures of the upper middle income bracket as effectively as one built on factory floors and industrial exports? As the celebratory banners in Manila are packed away, the streets of Masbate will ultimately decide the answer, whether this upgrade sticks or whether it remains a temporary headline. I am Hiro the Hornbill, and this is the ASEAN Angle. If this episode gave you a new way of seeing the region, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. New episodes weekly, link in the description.